Ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to you. My name's Andrew Stevens and I'm moderating this panel this afternoon. Appreciate your attendance. And I think this particular issue we're going to be discussing over the next 60 minutes or so, redesigning Asia's growth model, is one of the key themes not only here at the World Economic Forum, but a theme that's exercising policymakers pretty much around this region. This, at the moment, is probably the conundrum facing governments, and I don't think I need to tell you why. We've been through a spot of bother over the last few months, and I think, well, it's sure that the heart of Asia's problems, economic problems, obviously, has been its dependence on exports particularly to the United States and to the European Union to a lesser degree. So the time has come to look at the Asian growth model, how it's more self-sustaining, what Asia needs to do to cut its dependence on these markets, these traditional markets, if you like. It's interesting, you look at the numbers, and I think if you've seen a briefing note, the numbers on exports since the crisis first began, they still bear looking at. China exports down 27%. Taiwan 44%, Singapore 35%, South Korea 34%. Now tie that in with Asia generally having about half its economic activity tied to exports, and you realise there is a need for I would say, fundamental change in how Asia plans its growth over the next 10 to 100 years. The point here is that Asia can't afford not to do anything. The US consumer, as you no doubt know, is not coming back for some time to come. I heard a really interesting statistic yesterday about the US consumer. In 2007, your average US consumer bought 20 t-shirts and 7 pairs of shoes. Now, unless you play for the NBA, you're probably not going to be buying 7 pairs of shoes anymore in the US. So that demand has gone, and most research I read says it is a medium term, at least, before we see the re-emergence of the US consumer. So we're talking 3 to 5 years, perhaps minimum, before we see the US consumer coming back to like anything near the strength that he or she has been. Larry Summers, economics director for the Obama administration, said recently that he wants to see the US, the new US model, which is basically export-oriented away from consumer-driven. So that's the thinking in Washington. And I'm sure most consumers across the US would say they've done their bit for the global economy for some time to come. So how does Asia spur its own consumption growth? How does Asia get its own sustainable economic model working? Given the fact that across many parts of this region there is not adequate social safety nets, so people save because they worry about their future, about the prospect of not having a job, about the prospect of illness, and they need that money. So consequently savings rates are high in Asia, and that's just one reason why they are. You have to break a cultural identification. You really have to do a lot to change this model. But our panel here today hopefully can take us some way towards solving these issues, or at least raising topics that need to be addressed all at this level amongst participants here at the World Economic Forum, and of course at a policy level. And I'd like to introduce the guests to you now. On my immediate left, I have Zhao Qizheng. He is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee on the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. Next to Mr. Zhao is Hoang, the Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam. Next to him is Koji Miyahara. He is the chairman of NYK Shipping, the Japanese shipping giant, which is in fact the biggest shipping firm in Japan. And next to him, on my extreme left, is Kiat, Sittheeamorn, who is the president of the Thai Trade Representative Office. He is also has a deputy prime minister level role for international trade and investment. Basically everything that moves in and out, Kiat knows about. So on that note, let's begin. I'm going to ask questions, obviously, of the panel. Hopefully we're going to stimulate some interesting debate. I will be interested in taking questions from the floor during the course of these discussions, probably towards the end of our session. So if there is burning issues, hopefully it will get to you and we'll be able to address that. But I would like to start this by directing my first question to Mr. Zhao. Mr. Zhao, obviously representing the biggest economy and the biggest exporter. I shouldn't say the biggest economy, I should say the second biggest economy, and the massive exporter and a country that has been hit hard by the downturn. My first question to you is, does China need to change its model? And if so, what is being thought about in Beijing? What is the plan?
这个问题的回答
Well, the answer is yes to your question. China is bound to change its model for development. And we need to make use of opportunities to further improve our economy and press ahead with economic reforms while providing more opportunities to the growth of welfare and social security. At the very beginning, we thought some would have thought that the 4 trillion stimulus package was simply a bailout program. It's not as simple as that. China wants to make use of the opportunities arising from the crisis to restructure the Chinese economy and to reduce excessive reliance on exports, especially with regard to boosting domestic consumption in China, because in average terms, the average consumption in China is 20% lower than the world average, and our average investment rate is 20% higher than the world average. We have no intention to reduce our investment rate, but at the meantime, it is a pressing task for us to increase the consumption rate. And to be more specific, we need to provide more jobs, increase the income for Chinese citizens, and reduce tax rates for certain products and sectors. We also want to leverage this opportunity to destock or to remove some of the excess capacity in certain sectors, such as raw steel. For raw steel, we only need 500 million tons per annum, but we have 660 million tons of production capacity for raw steel. So with the downturn in exports, we need to weed out some of the X capacities in order to optimize the structure and to further boost some high and new tech industries. While encouraging consumption, we need to further build our social safety net and reduce educational costs, costs associated with education. And moreover, we need to provide more preferential policies for housing and other realms of people's livelihood so as to overcome the barrier for our people to spend more. So restructuring of the model is necessary, and we have a very good opportunity to do it now.
If I can just follow up on that, you have a very good opportunity to do it now, and jobs obviously is a key part of this. But jobs in which sectors? Because at the moment, a lot of the stimulus package went into big infrastructure projects, building things. Again, that is not a sustainable model. Where do you look for more organic growth in jobs?
我们想呢
High-tech industries such as energy, modern communication, and green industry in general point to a major areas of opportunity, as well as new technologies to deal with wastes. Those sectors require a lot of jobs. And also, some investments are regarded as infrastructure in certain countries and consumption in others. In the process of urbanization in China, we need to provide low-cost housing for the new urban residents. That's a huge industry. And also for the automotive industry, we have only 50 automobiles in every 1,000 people. And in the United States, it's 735 vehicles. In Europe, it's 331 vehicles in every 1,000 people. So there's a great room for improvement and development in China's auto industry, including the road infrastructure, the auto insurance industry, etc. At present, we are facing some difficulties with our university graduates, but that's for the short run. A more pressing task is for us to improve the levels of education for our rural migrant workers or the rural employees.
To turn it to Mr. Hoang Trong-hai, Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam. As an economy which is very much in the emerging category now, with an export component of something like 70% of the economy, a lot of that being soft commodities, but you have watched what has happened over the past 9 months. What lessons are you drawing as you set about restructuring your own economy anyway? What have you learnt in the past year about what you need to do now?
Well, all the country in the crisis now is talking about, redesigning their models, and Vietnam is not immune from that. And you're mentioning about 70% of the GDP is coming from the exports, and facing the crisis, our export is reducing, by 14%, and the total products of our exports is, it's about 50% is unprocessed. So based on the inefficiencies and low value added, sort of export products, in the years to come, Vietnam will have to improve that, efficiencies and high value added, products. And at the same time, we will have to increase our domestic, consumption, whereby the potential for that market is huge. So part of the stimulus sort of package of the government is to boost the demand in the rural area. So we make a lot of investment in the agriculture, in the water supplies, and in the education system in order to boost the demand in the domestic market. We also have the measures to increase the intra sort of regional trade between ASEAN, among ASEANs and between ASEANs with the Asia country. We have to put in effects of all the FTAs that we already have between ASEANs and India, China, Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea. So by that, we could increase not to change the whole, sort of export growth model, but we diversify that into more, sort of regional trading, and to actually diversify our products and technologies in order to make the products more competitive.
So if we were looking in 5 years' time at the Vietnamese model, what percent would be still export-oriented, do you think?
Well, I would suppose that the exports will continue to be growing by 20% for the next number of years. We're assuming that we will achieve a figure of 5% of GDP this year and 6.9% next year, and we're gonna increase that. So in order to achieve the figures of around 7 to 8% in average for a long term, we will need to export of 22% per annum.
But it will still be very much focused on the export market, but a different...
But we diversified it into the domestic and also the inter-regional sort of trading.
Okay. Miyahara-san, Japan for the past 15 years has struggled, economically speaking, compared to its potential, people will say. Given that there is, 2/3 of the economy is consumer-driven, consumer consumption, yet we have had this very weak economic growth for so long, what did Japan do, or what does Japan do wrong that it can't harness that consumption more, that personal domestic consumption, to push the economy harder?
Yeah, please allow me to speak in Japanese.
Thank you for that question. Well, in the second quarter, at long last, Japanese economy turned to a positive growth, but it is simply a stopping of the sliding, and it's not yet to see a robust growth recovery. And on the corporate side, each companies are trying to do away with the excess capacity and excess employment, and so still struggling. So that's the current situation. Now going forward, what do we do? As Mr. Stevens pointed out, well, in the past, why is it that we failed to harness the domestic demand and potential of that? And I can think of two directions we can think of for the future. The one is to boost domestic demand in Japan and to achieve a basic expansion of domestic demand through various measures. And for one thing, for instance, electric vehicle, development of electric vehicle, that's one of the examples we can pursue. That is to develop green technology, take advantage of the very advanced green technology we have, and try to promote new industries and new activities. And another point is that medical care or the nursing care or the education where the regulations are still stringent and strict, well, through deregulation, we can expand employment and also to boost domestic demand related to such services or such areas. That's another direction. And then the second direction we can look to would be that in the coming 3-4 years, we cannot expect to see a full recovery of our export to Europe or US. So, as is the main topic here, the China or the East Asian neighbors, by strengthening our collaborative relationship with our neighboring countries to stimulate and expand the demand within the Asian region. And Japan should take part fully in that and make more contribution there. And fortunately, we will be having the new regime under the new Prime Minister next week. And compared to the past government, the new government is very positive about enhancing the intra-Asian cooperation. There are various specifics we have to work on, but this cooperation with other Asian countries and to expand the demand within Asia, I think there is a lot we can expect out of Japan.
Two themes there which we will develop over the next the course of this debate: the green technology, obviously, and intra-regional trade. But I want to turn first to Kun Kiat. You've been around trade for many, many years now. You've been around government for many, many years. A very basic question to you: is there a growth model that you can apply to Asia as a whole? Is there one size fits all? What do you think the growth model should be?
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think I would submit to you that because of all the past arrangement and the current agreement that we already signed, things are moving towards Asia becoming a big Asia, but not literally. B basically stand for a better balance Asia. If you look at various countries being export-led, but with all of these agreements, Asia start to trade with each other more. So there is a correction already as a bloc, of all countries in Asia. That's already started to happen. If you look at export in the past, in particular for Thailand, we used to export to United States 25%. Now it's down to less than 14, 15, 16%, depending on the year. What has been increasing is the trade with ASEAN and also with China, South Korea, and Japan. Now, these trade blocs, which is already agreed, will make Asia becoming an I. I is integrated. But along with the better, deeper integration, it comes also with interdependent. Basically, you depend on each other more. So if both upsides and downsides. So, but definitely there is no doubt our economy will become more integrated. Now, and finally, the G. I think we have to go green. All Asia have to go green. If you look at the ratio of consumption of energy per capita of most countries in Asia, and in particular ASEAN, it's very high. It's more than 2 digits. Where in the developed economy it's only single digit, 6–7% of the GDP. There is no way out. We all have to work together to go green and to be more energy efficient. And some of the issues that we're talking now cannot be dealt with alone. It has to be based on concerted effort. You know, we're talking about the United Nations Framework on Climate Change Commission that has to conclude something by November this year. So again, this is the area of where you have to, all countries have to be accountable for the reduction of the emissions into the atmosphere. So I would say that the direction is already set, that Asia should become a big, better balanced, more integrated, and have to go green as a region.
What's the mechanism by which, because you all the panelists agree that intra-regional trade is going to play a much bigger role, a much more important role. What's the best mechanism for freeing up trade in Asia? I mean, we have APEC, we have ASEAN, we've got the WTO, and so on and so on. And I'll put this to you, Kiat. How does should Asia be looking at a separate supranational body to develop, basically to cut trade barriers to each other?
Well, at this point in time, all the agreements are in place, but the end goals are not quite there. So let me start with ASEAN Economic Community. Now, the agreement that is in place would ensure that by 2015, ASEAN will become one single market. Now, we have also extended this agreement to include China, South Korea, and Japan, which is approximately about the same time. Moreover, we have just signed an agreement a couple of weeks ago with India, ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement, which means for India it will be 2013, the first cutoff date, and then the second one is 2016. So by 2015, 2016, you will see a block of half of the world population and 1/3 of world trade.
I would have to say, though, that's a confident call, given the history of APEC.
Yes.
And I think APEC 2010 was, we were talking about this earlier, developing countries within APEC would have a trading bloc. That hasn't happened.
Yes.
So there are obviously political obstacles to that happening. But
Sure.
you think that this time it'll be different?
ASEAN agreement is very different from APEC. APEC has no secretariat. There has been nobody to chase after anyone. It's voluntary. So it's a nice goal, 2010 to 2010 and 2020. It's all good goals, good objectives. The benefit coming from APEC is more or less the bilateral opportunity for all the leaders of major countries to actually have the opportunity to talk to each other about many other issues related to their own economy and the world issue. But ASEAN is serious. We have ASEAN Secretariat based in Jakarta. We have everyone chip in to the process of making it happen. And all of this agreement has been discussed very thoroughly with a very careful study. And I believe all of us are committed to get there. And if any one country cannot do it on particular item, we have a modality. We have a system where we allow certain flexibility in compensation for what they cannot deliver. So all of these are already in place and is being tested. And the good goal of 2015, I strongly believe and have all the confidence that it will be met.
I'd just like to come back to Mr. Zhao for a minute. China will be a major consumer market for intra-regional Asian trade, I suspect. A statistic I heard recently was in 2007, the US consumer was worth about $10 trillion. In 2007, the China consumer was about $1 trillion. So how long is it going to take for China's domestic consumption market to become big enough to sustain so not only its own growth, but to have the growth of the rest of Asia as well? How long is it? This is, some people tell me it could be generational, 20 years.
呃，
This is not a purely economic issue. This is also an issue that involves the change in tradition and culture. Even though Chinese have money, they don't have to worry about schooling for their kids and old age care for their elderly. They will still be very thrifty. They will not be like the Americans who buy 20 T-shirts a year. That means we need more areas of new areas for consumption. That is to say, the service sectors in China are very backward. We need to promote service sectors to increase the services, to improve medical care, so that Chinese people can consume more in terms of leisurely products and Medicare, etc. Compared with other Asian neighbors, we have our unique difficulties because China is a vast country geographically. We have a huge regional imbalances in terms of development and education. Therefore, we have to learn from other countries, their experiences, and draw on their advantages. So black cat or white cat, that catches the mouse is the good cat. So you ask me how long that is going to can be expected. I think we don't need 20 years, but 10 years is at least what we're looking at.
China put into place now for something like developing the services industry, which is crucially important in any economy. Is this done at a sort of a free market level, if you like, or will that be directed from higher up?
Well, the Chinese policy always features a combination of a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. From top-down, there are some incentive policies insofar as investments and tax treatment are concerned. But bottom-up, for example, let me give you an example. We used to have a weekend of only one day, but now we have a weekend of 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. So a lot of demand has been generated in this way. A combination of top-down and bottom-up requires a merging or a converging mechanism, such as the discussions that are taking place at the CPPCC and the National People's Congress, the Parliament. And I think the happiness index of the people hinges very much on the level of development of the service sector. And in China, pursuit of such happiness is even more important than liberty or indicators of freedom, because Chinese are very pragmatic.
Miyahara-san, talking about unlocking people's savings, in Japan there is a very good social safety net. There is a developed economy, yet there is a reluctance still, compared with the US and Europe, to spend. How do you go about unlocking that?
Well, thank you. Indeed. For one thing, there is the view of life or a view of customs particular to Japan about frugality and to place emphasis on savings, and also some uncertainty about later years, or the uncertainty about the pension or the nursing care or the high cost of education and so forth. That may work as a drag on the consumption among Japanese, like in the past. And so it should be liberated and to do away with uncertainties. And at the same time, new type of demand should be stimulated and explored domestically in Japan. One typical example in point would be the case of a new clothing shop called Uniqlo, at a very reasonable low price and very high quality apparels and goods, mostly made in China. And also there is a convenience store chain called Lawson. not a mere convenience store chain, but if you go to Lawson, you would find a whole range of daily necessities, including the perishables and fresh food with food safety. And that would stimulate and explore the new demand within Japan and gathering strength. So this is something we can encourage further to liberate the savings and promote consumption.
Deputy Prime Minister Hoang, when you are now looking at the economic model that Vietnam is going to apply over the next 5, 10, 15 years, how much will this government, will your government be spending on healthcare, on providing those social services, and how important is it for you to do that given where you are in your economic development?
Well, we see that, as you were mentioning, that the lessons that learned from the crisis, we see that the weaknesses that we have as the hurdles and as the task that we will have to do is to eliminate the bottlenecks that we have in infrastructure, education, healthcare system, and in doing that, the government, instead of putting a lot of investment on the infrastructure, will have to prioritize the government spending on the education and healthcare system. At the same time, with what we call it socialized, I mean, they call in the private investment in also the education and healthcare system. We have to manage the public-private model of investment into the infrastructure in order to reduce the government spending on that and to maintain more stable sort of macro economy. And that's the issues that we have learned from the past, that we by making a lot of investment into the infrastructure, we actually facing the issues of the inflation. So the government in the future would have to diversify that investment more into the private sectors and prioritizing in the poor area and boosting the domestic demand.
We mentioning green technology earlier, is this a bit of a sort of a pie in the sky hope? I mean, we're not that close to having realistically sort of applicable green technology at the moment, apart from sort of light bulbs and solar and wind is coming. But is green technology something, and I'll put this to you first, Mr. Hoang, excuse me, Mr. Zhao. Where does green technology fit in your immediate list of things to do?
The green technology is a pioneer in our development. So far as energy is concerned, China is the biggest coal power generator in the world, creating the largest quantity of CO2. So nuclear power station only accounts to 2 to 3% of our power generation in China. Every year, we are going to build between 1,000 and 2,000 megawatts of nuclear power every year going forward. And wind energy is extensively utilized in the world, and with a lot of state-of-the-art technologies. In Shanghai, we have a wind power project with a 1.5 megawatt turbine on a unit capacity basis already deployed. And also, we are developing hybrid fuel vehicles, both electric and fuel-driven. And in emission reduction technology, we will also honor our international commitments, and we're willing to import leading and advanced international technology and equipment to help us further reduce emission and attain our targets therein. And also for the urban waste treatment, it is tremendous in quantity, and also it has complex ingredients. Some of them are not disposable by incineration. Therefore, for vegetables and grains that are brought into the city, we need to upgrade their quality. That's a work in progress. So those are the difficulties and challenges of China, and China must regard green technology and industry as a top priority. So it's a clear-cut position and policy on the part of us, and we're going to sustain such a policy.
Somewhere like Thailand, where it doesn't necessarily have the same sort of resources to throw at technological developments in the green area, how is it treated in Thailand, and how does it fit into the idea of a more balanced economy?
Well, first of all, green technology is not cost. It's in itself a business. So in fact, it creates employment as well. So the way we're going to be doing it, several folds. I think, first of all, I mentioned about the energy, being more energy efficient in the future. The only way to fix that is improving the logistic costs. In Thailand, we still do a lot of goods transportation by truck, which is very costly. So we are building a whole network of railroads and rail links all the way to southern part of China. So that is already work in progress. It's about to be completed very soon. That would help reduce a certain amount of fuel, biofuel that we have consumed. On top of that, there are several areas, in particular the Maptaput area, where we have a very, high density of industrial establishments. So what we say is that for those, we are in the process of setting up a special economic zone throughout the country. We have planned for 56 provinces out of 76 provinces. And one of the plans to address the emission issues in the Maptaput area, southern seaboard, is to provide tax incentives and all kinds of government assistance programs to make sure that some of this new investment to help reduce the emission will be in itself economically viable and financially bankable. So we try to be very much business oriented in our design of policy, and I believe that that would in itself, not only it is a business, but it's also help address the issue of the energy inefficiency and also the pollution.
And if I could just ask Mr. Hoang to comment on Vietnam's policy on that, and how does that fit into the overall economic picture?
Well, Vietnam is considering the green economy as the must. It's inevitable because when we select the export-led model, the products that are exported to other countries will have to meet all the environmental standards and criteria. Secondly, Vietnam is actually the countries that in a longer term is to be the energy imported countries. So it doesn't have to reduce consumptions of the energy and also improve the efficiencies. And I agree with Kiat that our efficiency is very, very low, and it's about we have to use at the moment more than 20% of our energy for producing one unit of GDP. So the green economy as the must that we will have to embark on that. The government is set up the strategy, and we have to follow all the international standards for environment. We have to build all the feasibility study for every project to do with the environment evaluations. The EIA will have to be approved before any project to be going any further. And the new and renewable energy will have to achieve the figure of 5 to 8% by the year 2015. So that is the criteria that the government is putting forward and forcing the business and the country to follow.
Okay. I wanted to quickly open this up at this stage to the floor, if there is anything that you've been hearing so far in these discussions that you'd like to pick up on. Do we have anyone so far? Yes, just down the front here, Dom. If you could just say your name and who you're with.
Don Lam from Vina Capital in Vietnam. Just at the discussion we have so far, it's been quite interesting in terms of the consensus seems to be that to grow, you need to sort of do more regional trade and domestic consumption. And essentially what we're saying is the US consumer is spending too much money and putting too much debt. And the Asian consumer is saving too much and don't spend enough. So what we're saying that we're trying to encourage the Asian consumer to spend more money, save less, and the US consumer go the other way around. So the question to the panel is, aren't we worried that eventually at some point that we're piling on too much debt privately? So we have another crisis, but from Asia base. Because keeping in mind, during the Asian financial crisis, it was the Asian corporate that was borrowing too much. So then now we have the American consumer borrowing too much. Who knows, 10 years from now, maybe the Asian consumer is borrowing too much. So are we worried about that?
So are we setting ourselves up for another unsustainable model on this side of the world? Okay, Mr. Zhao, perhaps you'd like to kick off on that one.
Well, the worry of China is that we consume too little. We don't know when we're going to witness excessive consumption in China. In contrast to Europe and North America, Asia has its gaps in terms of economic structure. For all our high-tech industries, we are buying European and American patents at very high prices. And after the acquisition of the patents, we cannot develop our own innovations. And several years later, we once again need to buy patents from American and European countries. So in the case of China, we need to strengthen our own independent innovation. We need to do our science and development research and development. And the Chinese, while cooperating with other countries, we should play a bigger part in our innovations, in rebalancing our economy.
Kiat.
Well, I like to jump in here. Actually, we're talking about the two extremes. We don't promote overconsumption either, you know. What we should do, I'll give you some very clear example. In the past, we're export-oriented. We keep our wealth in US dollars. We invest in the US, in T-bills, T-bonds. Now, what we can do differently today? You create wealth, you trade with each other more. We also setting up this Asian bonds market initiative. It's being developed right now. So that's an alternative. You continue to keep your wealth and keep investing in the region. I think that would make more sense. You know, stimulate your growth from within the group. That's one thing. And I have just one idea. Just perhaps China can help solve all the economy of Asian countries altogether. Today, Chinese tourists has been to Thailand maybe 1 million out of 1.3 billion. I think China have high savings. Go out and be more happy. Have a tour to all the countries in Asia. You increase the service sector within the region. Immediately, you address the issue of not spending in China, and with high savings, everybody wins. This region will become a very nice and happy and high growth region. How about that?
I second your proposition.
So we can expect 10 million tourists coming to Asia this year?
But I do think it is. I mean, there is a serious point there, isn't there? I mean,
Absolutely.
That was Hong Kong's model during the Asian economic crisis. How will Hong Kong get itself out of these problems? Chinese tourists, mainland tourists coming over. I mean, is there a push for more outward bound tourism?
Now Chinese people love to travel, and Thailand is a priority destination. Japan is also a good choice, but Japan is too expensive. The air tickets can be too expensive. The Japanese government has imposed a minimum price for air tickets. Vietnam, of course, is also a good choice, and the Asian cultures are similar to each other. But whether or not we can achieve the same kind of integration as we can see in Europe, in the 60s, Europeans, they didn't say we are British, we are French, we are German. They say we are Europeans. But now, only now, we start to say we are Asians. Perhaps in 40 times, we can see an Asian Union or Asian dollar. That is possible in the future. But our population is 3 times that of Europe. Our land size is twice that of Europe. So it might take a longer time for this Asian Union to come about.
So you could put on a few more cruise ships.
Thank you. In order to stimulate the demand within the Asian region, of course, that's important, and I've been emphasizing that. But what's important here, not to make mistake, is that it's not that Asian countries can survive depending on Asian regional demand alone. We have to think of our export to Europe and the United States. It will continue to be important, but it will not be as high as in the past. It will take time for the level to increase that much. And at the same time, there is a gigantic production capacity within Asia. In the past 10 years, our export to Europe and the US, in order to satisfy that, there has been a major supply chain. China has a major production plant, and then Japan, Korea, or ASEAN countries exported parts and intermediate goods to China, and then China exported in the finished goods to outside. So there has been a major supply chain capacity established. And this is the best in the world, not seen elsewhere. It is a very valuable asset we have in this region. So we should try to take full advantage of it in the best possible way to benefit the Asian people, and to produce the goods Asian people would prefer and enjoy to buy, and also continue to produce goods for US and Europe as well. And logistics has been referred to. Our company also is working very hard to achieve the optimum and most effective transportation and logistics systems. We will continue to work at it and continue to contribute to that.
There was a question of this gentleman here.
Yes, thank you. Very good discussion. My name is Jack Modulewski with Fleshman Hillard International Communications. There's been a lot of discussion about the consumer savings, consumer consumption in Asia, in the United States. I was hoping that you could address another aspect of economic vitality, and that is the ability of companies in Asia to create jobs in other parts of the world. The Japanese model is a very good one. For decades, the Japanese companies have been creating jobs in the United States and Europe and elsewhere. That creates economic vitality, taxes, the ability of consumers in those markets to have more wealth. Do you see Chinese companies in particular, Korean companies, companies from Thailand, Vietnam, having the ability in the next decade to take more of their manufacturing and service models to other parts of the world? Doesn't necessarily have to be just North America. It can be Africa, the Middle East, Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zhao.
预言未来是最。
It's very dangerous to to make forecasts, but at present, it must be difficult for green industry in China to operate overseas. We don't have the core technology, and not all the countries in the world welcome the Chinese capital. For example, the Americans are pretty hesitant in that regard, but the Asians are more positive attitude. In the long run, it is possible. Though China is willing to accept investment from overseas, we are also willing to invest outboundly.
Panel, like to comment on that?
Well, I think that's the good questions, and I think that every country will have their models, and every models or sort of strategy will have side effect of that. But the point is that if the government acting together and getting out of the, the trend of the protectionisms, and also to agree on the, the measures to control the flow of capital and not to let the case of the, banking crisis that happen, we can protect, the result or whatever the achievement that we have, Otherwise, every country is changing their model, making a lot of investment, and they end up with another story of crisis. Thanks.
If I may add, actually, the market in each region will direct itself as to what business model one could take. If so long as the logistic costs are not too high to ensure that you can capture that particular market with reasonable margins, then you continue to manufacture in your own country and sell it there. But once it becomes more and more competitive, you have to look at relocation of your production into a certain country in a certain market. Secondly is the regional grouping agreements. All of this is very important. It depends on how it is organized. Now Latin America with the Mercosur and Andean becoming a single market, that in itself is interesting, and I'm taking a delegation to look at specific investment in the next month. In recent months, actually, starting from January last year, Thailand has been quite successful in exporting their expertise in specific area to other countries, in particular in construction. Thai companies managed to secure construction of international airport in Kolkata with 20 million passenger per annum. That's already a skill set that is very unique for Thailand, built on Suvarnabhumi Airport experience. Now, we also have a lot of very strong housing area where our developer, our contractor, our engineers and architects already export their service as far as Nigeria. We basically negotiate a land provision by the government, and we help develop and build a housing compound for expatriate. And this will be repeated again and again. We have issues in Middle East where we have our strength in food sector, food manufacturing sector. One of our company is building a facility for poultry and shrimp farming in Middle East. So there are lots of this that is happening, and we are, not to mention Vietnam, we have a number of very major investment in Vietnam, including the setting up of industrial estate in Vietnam.
Just curious on Vietnam, Deputy Prime Minister, who is your biggest inward investors, and who do you expect them to be over the next 5 years or so? Will they be Asian companies, or will they still be US, European?
Well, Asian and US, yeah. We have the Singapore. Singapore is the biggest, investment in our countries, and United States is ranked also second or third, and, other Asian from Taiwan and Japan. We see that the possibility of the diversifying that, the investment coming from the States will be increasing, and also more investment will come from the Asia itself. Yeah.
Okay, lady over here with the white.
Okay, thank you. I'm from Dalian Broadcasting Station. My question is, we all know Asian countries is export driven, and we all want to do the model of consuming driven. But I have a grandma. She is 80 years old, and I know she has a lot of money by the saving. But it's very difficult to let she spend some money on something. So I want to ask the leader from 4 countries, how should you persuade your people, such as my grandma, to spend the money in their pocket? I think it's a very important question. Thank you.
How do you open Granny's purse? Sir.
两个办法。
There are 2 ways. For the Chinese grandmas, they love their grandkids. You spend money on your kids, give them very good schooling, give them milk, so that the grandmas, they will pay for that. And they also like longevity. So you buy ginseng, things like that, then they would be willing to pay for that.
May I suggest that I can meet with your grandma at 4 o'clock today? I'll try to convince her. Basically, she should pass on to the children to spend. The children will have no problem spending it.
It is the same in Japan, is it not, that the elderly do keep hold? How do you unlock that?
Indeed, spend on children or grandchildren. The elderly people feel free about spending, so let them do that. And also, the very well facilitated old age care facilities. We should increase such facilities, and then with that, there will be a greater purchase of furniture, lighting, and so forth to equip such good nursing care facilities and institutions. Thank you.
Okay. I've got time for one more question. This gentleman in the third row just here.
Thank you. Luoshen from Oriental Morning Post in Shanghai. My question is, China and ASEAN countries will build up a free trade area in 2010. It will cover 1.8 billion people in the region and be the biggest one in the world. So what kind of influence will it bring to the export situation to those countries in the region? And what kind of opportunities and challenges it will meet?
I think we've sort of covered this area about trade and about Kun Kiat talking about trade. Perhaps if you could just answer that briefly, Kun Kiat, just about China, ASEAN.
Well, basically, we already have a lot of programs in place, agreements in place, which will be by the year 2015 to 2016. And that will cover anything from ASEAN, including China, South Korea, Japan, including India, which means a large and important blocks. Now, we also have Secretariat Office to monitor, and the leaders meet every year in order to monitor the program. So I think it's a very serious undertaking, and I think all leaders of all countries are very much committed. So basically, that will give an opportunity for even the business people will have to rethink a new business model, because when you have single market as compared to segregate market, you approach it very differently. Okay.
Okay. There is one question I'd just like to ask before we close this. There's a report from McKinsey recently that said about 90% of the China stimulus package found its way into big infrastructure projects, rails, road, etc. And my question to you, Mr. Zhao, and actually to the panel as well, is how do you develop your small and medium-sized businesses? They are the backbone of economies in the US and in Europe. At the moment, we're getting a lot of top-down going into state-run companies, into big projects. How do you develop that SME level?
McKinsey might fail to take a note of the recent changes in China. By July this year, the central fiscal based investments, infrastructure accounted only for 29%, and a quarter is invested in science and technology innovations and high-end new tech industries, the restructuring and upgrading of those industries, and the environmental sector. And 50% of the stimulus package are invested into the housing sector and the rural reforms, including rural infrastructure, rural housing, and social undertakings, social safety net, and social security. So maybe the McKinsey figures are not updated yet.
Just to that point about developing the smaller and medium-sized enterprises, the small entrepreneurs, if you like, what sort of emphasis is China putting on developing that sector?
So far as SME is concerned, the number one difficulty or bottleneck for them is the short of capital, the finance. Banks in China used to be reluctant to lend to them for fear of risks. China is drafting and stimulating policies to provide guarantee for loans extended to them. And maybe China is in the process of establishing a special or dedicated SME bank in the near future.
Well, actually, in our case, the stimulus package is not as big as that in China. We have only about $6 billion. But we see that the stimulus money was coming first to the small and medium enterprises which employ 90% of our labor force. So that stimulus package to help them to maintain the employment during the crisis, and because of that, they continue to get back to the market whenever the market was growing. And secondly, we could help them to kind of maintain the social security to the employment.
So this is a key economic policy is developing this sector. As you say, 90% it has to be.
Yeah, 90% of the employment is employed by the SME. So the stimulus market is supplied to them, not to the big, sort of junk.
Miyahara-san, what's the experience in Japan? And again, is it something that needs to be looked at as far as rebalancing an economic model?
Hi.
Yes, indeed. In Japan, also, in terms of number of companies, 99% of the numbers of companies are SMEs. Therefore, employment by SME has a very high rate and significance. Therefore, for the management of SME, just as Mr. Zhao mentioned, the financing is one issue, and one other important issue would be for SME to come up with unique products and services unrivaled by others. So SME each should have its own identity they can sell on. So in that sense, SME will continue to be important and will continue to be active.
Well, basically, for the case of Thailand, we already have developed SME banks. We have SME institutes providing the software, the knowledge, help develop certain products and even this packages design, things like that. SME banks would look at SME in a very different light. We know that very well, that SME, they're very easy to start up and they die so quickly. 1 in 4 actually is more than 5 years old. So we have to understand all that, and in our lending program, we have to take a look at the quality of the product or services of the SME in question, and also we have to look at how do we help sustain provide the access to capital is one thing, but access to market is something which is extremely difficult. And we also have the program with the SME Bank to help in the areas of access to market, in advertising, in launching some of their products through various medias. So we pay a lot of importance to SMEs, and we have very specifically designed program for it. And during the crisis, we actually have screened them out, those SME in troubles, in particular in the tourism sector, which we approved the credit terms based on very special program to help them. And but all of this will be gone if China just sent 10 million to Thailand.
Before we wrap up, I'd just like to ask a final question and a short answer, please, gentlemen. And this is quite a short-term answer. I'd like to start with you, Kiat. How worried are you that there is another leg down in this economic cycle before we fully recover, a W-shaped?
Well, it's a very challenging question. For the moment, all the positive signs are there. Now, how sustainable it is, it depends on the whole set of circumstances, which is very much external to our country. Now, if we're not having another oil shock, rapid rise in oil prices, if we're not having another crisis in the Middle East somewhere, if we do not have energy crisis, I would say that it's not going to be W.
Okay. Miyahara.
Hi.
The key is the U.S. financial system when it would restore the soundness and health. I am not pessimistic, but maybe it will take to another 2-3 years for the full recovery.
With all the lessons learned from the crisis, the crisis of '97, make the Asian countries more experienced on dealing with it, and with this crisis, and with the program that the G20 have put forward, and with the willingness that the countries all over the world are willing to act, collectively, So I believe that, you know, the market will not coming down again like the W, you know, sort of shape.
Mr. Zhao.
无论
Well, even if there are new bad signs, we still need to survive. And when emerging situation comes about, new wisdom will be inspired. I'm so confident in that.
And on that note, on that message of new wisdom, we hope that you've learned something here today. We've run over a bit, so I'll have to say a short goodbye. I'd just like to say thank you very much to our distinguished panel today for their time and their thoughts.